So now you all must look at your text. So if you have the English translation text, so this is a translation. This English translation is done by Stephen Batchelor and printed by Tibetan Library, Dharamsala. So Kunu Lama Rinpoche used to tell me that I think probably in the 8th century, Shantideva composed this text, a guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life. So from that onwards till today, this is the most important text in terms of the mind training. So such a kind of text have not been composed in the past, and in future also such a text may not arrive. This is what Kunu Lama Rinpoche told me, and I think this is really true. And this text is really very helpful for one's own mind training, and also the logic reasoning behind the debate between the self-concern and the others' concern are really very powerful. And also the chapter on the patience, the negativities pertaining to anger are really very wonderful. So this text is not just merely for doing recitation or prayer, but more for one's own contemplation. And it's something which is very relevant to one's own daily practice. So I don't know about the whole the transmission. A guide to the Bodhisattva's way, and the term Bodhisattva, as we discussed. So Bodhi in Tibetan means Jangchup, which means whichever connotation of the magnificence of the abandonment and realization. So such a state of enlightenment is called the Great Enlightenment. So generally the Tibetan term Jang can be also referred to the mere cessation from the afflicted emotion. And also to the Pratigya Buddhas, even though they have not eliminated the obscuration to omniscient mind, but they have a certain qualification. So therefore, these two, the liberation pertaining to the Sharvaka, those in the classes of hearer and the solitary realizer, are actually lesser and inferior compared to the complete enlightened one. So here, the great Bodhi or the Jangchup is actually referred to the great completion, which understand the emptiness directly, and also where the meditative absorption and the post-meditative absorptions are same. And this is coming from the Maitreya's text. So being in the state of meditative absorption, so the enlightened one understands all the conventional phenomena at the same time. So this is due to being able to eliminate all the obscurations pertaining to it. So here, the second term, the chup in Tibetan, which means realization, qualification, quality pertaining to realization. And also for the abandonment. So in order to abandon of the omniscient, the obscuration to omniscient mind, one need to understand the emptiness. That emptiness, again, meditating on emptiness is referring to the meditating on emptiness with all its other features. So therefore, as we have discussed this morning, that the wisdom focus on the enlightenment and the compassion focus to sentient being. And this is what also in the Maitreya's Abhisamaya Alamkara, that the bodhicitta is of the two intention. So such a kind of the awakening mind, which is bodhicitta, to cultivate it and to foster and enhance further. So we need to study these texts. And also among the practice of the Bodhisattva, we have the 6 perfections to ripen one's own mental continuum and the 4 ways of gathering disciple to ripen others' mental stream. So we need to study in this way. And also in these practices, there are 3 different categories in terms of the realization and so on. And engaging, the first is the engaging. It explains about that the person, when they attain the bodhicitta for the first time, so they become a bodhisattva. So therefore, it's called the engaging bodhicitta. And once become bodhisattva, then when they practice the first 6 perfections and so on. So therefore, this is another set of the practice, which is practice in terms of one's realization. So all the practices of the bodhisattvas need to be categorized or summarized with these 3 activities. So these 3 activities are very detailed, in detail presented here. So in Sanskrit, Bodhisattva Charya Avatara, in Tibetan, Chanju Sembe Choba La Choba. So the Indian great scholars, so when they compose in the text, so there is a way to name the text after the author. For example, the Buddha Palita, who is the author also, and the name of the text is also the Buddha Palita. So the text is given the name by the author. But then there is other text where the name is given by the content of the text. So there are few variations in giving the name of the title. So here, the title of the text is being given by the content, as this text very explicitly presents about the activities and the deeds of the Bodhisattva. Therefore, it is called a guide to the Bodhisattva way of life. And next is the prostration to complete the text. So this homage to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, this is not actually the part of the actual text, but the Tibetan translators, when translating the text into English, so they put this line in order to swiftly and successfully complete the text. And the Tibetan emperors also laid out a rule that if the text is being fall into one of the 3 trainings, such as, for example, the concentration, then the prostration is done to Manjushri, because it falls under the wisdom. Then if it is the sutra, then the prostration is done to homage to Buddhas and Bodhisattva. And if the text is something related to Vinaya, then the prostration is made to the Omniscient One. So there is this tradition in Tibet. So therefore, since this text presents about the parts of the Bodhisattva and the 6 perfections, so therefore this text is included as the sutra from the 3 baskets. So next is the salutation verses. The verse number 1, respectfully I prostrate myself to the Sukhadas, who were endowed with the Dhammakaya, which is the salutation verses here. And the 3rd and the 4th line is actually the pledge to compose, as well as to their noble sons and to all who are worthy of veneration. Here I shall explain how to engage in the vows of Buddha's son, the meaning of which I have condensed in accordance with the scriptures. So here, so here when it referred to who are the worthy of veneration. So worthy of veneration can be here referred to all the practitioners in the classes of the hero and solitary realizers. And this actually presents the refuge-taking practice. So all the religions actually speak about going for refuge. In terms of the theistic religion, for example, like Islam, so they take refuge in the Allah. And for the Christianity, they take refuge in the Jesus Christ, the God. And for the Buddhists, they go for refuge to Buddha. And in Buddhism, there is no such a concept of one God. So they speak about, here the Buddhism speaks about the three refuge, and which are the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. So they are the savior of those who wish to attain liberation. So if someone who wish to attain liberation, so these three objects of worship are the veneration are the ultimate savior according to Buddhists. So in the case of Samkhya traditions, so in terms of the Samkhya traditions, one of the old ancient Indian traditions, they speaks about the supreme generality, which is the cause of all the, which is the creator, and also behind the reason of all the phenomena, origin of all the phenomena in this world. And when a practitioner realizes that it is this supreme generality which is the cause, then one is said to attain liberation. So this is according to Samkhya tradition. But here, in terms of Buddhism, Nagarjuna has presented very clearly through the explanation of the Four Noble Truths. So the first, the truth of suffering, then the cause of the truth of suffering. And again, for the cause of truth of suffering, it speaks about first the karmic actions, and the karmic actions are again caused by the afflicted emotions of the attachment and desire and anger and so on. And a state where one completely eradicates and eliminates even the latent form of this affliction is called the cessation or the liberation. And what is the nature of the moksha or the truth of cessation? We generally categorize it as a fruit arising out of one's elimination of a certain afflicted emotion. And there are certain variations in terms of the assertion of the moksha or the liberation as being by nature of emptiness or another phenomena. And so Nagarjuna has these special verses where there is a different variation to the fourth line. And there is one term in Tibetan, the agent verb is used where the emptiness acts as an agent where all the other phenomena dissolves into it. And I think this is really wonderful. All the conventional appearances will be dissolved by the emptiness. So here the emptiness is being characterized as an agent where all the conventional phenomena dissolve into it. And so this is pertaining to the cause and the result of the interdependent relation in terms of the truth of suffering and the origin of the truth of suffering on the one side, which is again here the conventional phenomena. Then for the cessation and the path to cessation is similar. So the cessation here, so if we have to point our finger, then it is the nature of the mind, or which is the emptiness by itself. So this is, I think, true because the reason why we have such a kind of grasping is that we have a certain intrinsic grasping of the mind. So therefore, all these afflicted emotions arise. But once we eliminate all these obscurations, even its latencies, then we realize the very nature of the mind, which is again the emptiness here, and which is referred to as the truth of cessation. And sometimes we refer to it as the afflicted emotions as being eliminated, abandoned, or sometimes it is being pacified in the form of the emptiness. So therefore, the emptiness here as an object where all the phenomena are being dissolved into emptiness, and the emptiness acts as an agent where it creates the causes for all the conventional phenomena to dissolve into it. So this is coming from the 18th chapter of Nagarjuna's Middle Way philosophy. So whether there is the existence of the omniscient state, the complete enlightenment state or not, first we need to establish the liberation state. So then how the liberation, we have to prove the existence of liberation. Then the Nagarjuna says that the karma and the afflicted emotions arises from conceptual thoughts. And this our physical form, which is the nature of the five aggregates, are actually the result of this karma. And this karma is again given a rise by the afflicted emotions. And within these afflicted emotions, there will be different variations in terms of its strength. So therefore, I find this spiritual verse is very powerful, that the conceptual thought and the karma actually arises from the afflicted emotions. And I have a scientist friend, and he told me that this is really very true. I've met him about 10 years back and also about 15 years back. And at that time, he presented me a book which reads about that we humans are living in the jail of anger. And at that time, I have a conversation with him, and he told me at that time that when a person gets really angry, so that other person to whom one gets angry appears very violent object to us. So at that time, so whether we are getting angry towards someone or attached to someone, so our mental, so that kind of mind actually exaggerate and create that object about 180% mental projection. So I met him a few times, and at that time he was 97 years old. And he told me that for many decades, he was doing research, especially to the patient, with respect to someone who has been disturbed by emotions, especially the anger and so on. So he was a kind of a medical practitioner helping such kind of patients. So therefore, the verse coming from the Nagarjuna's middle way, fundamental of the middle way, which says that the karma and the afflicted emotions arise from conceptual mind. And this is also very clear in the other chapters, that the three poisons of the attachments actually arises from conceptual elaborations. And also, Lord Buddha has stated in the sutra that the three poisons of the afflicted minds also arises from the conceptual thoughts. And for example, when someone gets attachment towards someone, actually it was the conceptual thought which precedes the attachment and creates that object as very adorable and being very desirable. So with the power of that conceptual thought, by exaggerating the nature of that object, so the attachment comes after that. And similarly, it is same for the anger and hatred. So therefore, the object of the anger and the attachment it appears in a very intrinsic nature to our mind, having its own identity. For example, when you get angry at someone, so that person to whom you get angry appears very independent and also in a very aggressive nature to you. But as your anger calms down, so even at the time of the anger, so even though that person may appear something like a poison tree to you, but later, if someone tells you that, oh, that person even praise you, then earlier, so your thinking about your perception about that person will change a little bit. So therefore, this is very evidently proved that it is entirely our mental projection, that too coming due to the conceptual thoughts. And it contemplates about the factors that give rise to anger. For example, he did this to me, he did that to me, and so counting about these reasons, so then your anger and attachment towards that certain person increases. Aaron Beck is an American, and I also asked him, so what about attachment? He says that, oh, this is not very important. He says that attachment is something that we have, we need as a part of our daily life, and also consider that as the essence of one's life. And also we have attachment towards the physical form, and also for the sound and the taste and so on. And for example, for the physical, we have the lust, which is considered to be the very essence of the existence of our life. But if we give it another, if you look from another perspective, I think that even for the anger, so anger was even given rise to by attachment. So when someone gets angry and when you feel some obstacles to attain your own thing, so then the anger comes. So the greater your self-centered feeling, so therefore it's very clearly that the greater your self-centered feeling is, the more possibility that the attachment and anger will arise. So therefore this proves that the attachment is again here the basis and the cause for giving rise to anger. And when we are in a very calm state, in a neutral state, then there is a less chances for those afflicted emotions to arise. So therefore, these two lines from the Nagarjuna, we have to really contemplate that the karma and the afflicted emotion arise from conceptual thoughts, and all the other mental projections and exaggerations of the conventional phenomena will all be dissolved into the emptiness and will all be dissolved by emptiness. So these three lines we have to contemplate and we have to think about it. And if you contemplate further, we will come to know that the true grasping, the grasping of true existence, again, it plays a role in giving rise to the conceptual thoughts that again give rise to the attachment and anger. So therefore, ultimately, the grasping of the true existence, so if it decreases, then the conceptual thoughts, the negative thoughts, conceptual thoughts that follows it will decrease. So therefore, automatically, the attachment and the desire and anger will decrease. So therefore, I think it's not very appropriate for me to say, but I think I wanted to share this, that it has been over 60 years since I've been contemplating and meditating on emptiness. Since I was as young as about 16 years, I have been thinking and meditating a lot on emptiness with the help of my tutor, Sonila. So it was due to his kindness that he taught me the emptiness, the meaning of the emptiness. Then I contemplate about it in Tibet and also after arriving in India. So after that, I was able to generate a clear understanding about the absence of the person as self-sustaining and sufficiently existent. So even though that is a lower form of the selflessness pertaining to the highest Madhyamika school, but that actually helps a lot to further cultivate and enhance one's own understanding of the emptiness. And when the person appears, even though you have this understanding of the lower Madhyamika understanding of the emptiness, so that won't help really to attain the supreme selflessness understanding. So we have to contemplate as the verse from the Ratnavali, the precious garland from Nagarjuna, which says that as long as you have the grasping for your aggregates, so the grasping, your self-grasping will continue. So therefore, so first the basis of the designation, and here the basic of the designation as the aggregate, and the quality of designation, which is the person. So in order to understand the person as being empty of inherent existence, one need to understand first the basis of designation, which is the aggregate, as being empty of inherent existence. So now this is very contemplated. So the self-grasping, the focus object of the self-grasping, which is the self. So sometimes we tend to think that the self as something which is a part of consciousness. So this is something very common, I think, even in some of the traditions, philosophical systems in Buddhist schools. They consider the point of the reference of the self is the consciousness in many schools. And for example, in the mind-only schools, they have the alaya, which is the foundational mind, as the point of reference of the self. So therefore, but according to the highest Madhyamika school, so the self, if you have to analyze further, then there is no way that you can pinpoint to any point. There is no way that you can find any substance of your continuous analyzation, not even the consciousness, not even the foundational mind, or not even the physical or the mind. So when we reach such a state, then generally we will get a sense of feeling that there is no self. And as long as you have the grasping for the aggregates, you will have a grasping for the mind, grasping of self. And if you have the grasping for self, then due to that you will get reborn again in the world. So this is the verse coming from Ratnavali. And so when we understand the nature of the self in this way, we have to come to conclusion that the self is merely existence by as is being widely designated in this world. So if you contemplate in this way, it is 100% sure that we could shift and at least give some shape to the afflicted emotions. And if we have contemplate and meditate in this way, the desires, especially for the desire realm, attachment and desire towards the five desire objects will reduce. And when we contemplate further in this way, then we get a sense of a feeling that, of course, you will be able to control the very evident and the strong nature of those afflicted emotions. Then when we are able to reduce the very evident form of the afflicted emotions to a certain level, then we also get the encouragement and the inspiration for ourselves that, of course, there is a possibility that we will be completely eradicate and eliminate the afflicted emotions. So if we contemplate on the nature of the emptiness and the selflessness in this way, then we will get a very broad idea about the Four Noble Truths. And the Four Noble Truths here is not merely a counting of the numbers, but one need to have understanding based on one's own practice. And Nagarjuna also says that if we understand the Tibetan origination, then we will understand the origins of the Four Noble Truths. So this is present in one of the chapters of the Fundamental of the Middle Way by Nagarjuna. And as for me, I feel that these kind of the teachings will not be found in the Lamrim and the other mind training teachings. So therefore, we need to study the analytical corpus of the Nagarjuna and the other texts. And ultimately, all the phenomena exist only conventional, and this is similar to what we read from the Heart Sutra, that the form is emptiness, and emptiness is form, and form is not different from emptiness, and emptiness is not different from form. So this goes very similar and very nicely with our understanding, the presentation of the emptiness coming from the Nagarjuna's text. So ultimately, if we understand the nature of our mind, then this is liberation. If one do not understand the nature of our mind, then we are in samsara. So the definition or the distinction between liberation and the samsara or the cyclic existence is due to one's whether one recognizes the nature of the mind or not. So therefore, Chandakriti says that Buddha Dharma and the Supreme Assembly are the supreme savior of those who aspire to attain liberation. And this is similar for the other practitioners coming from a different faith. So if someone practices accordingly to what is being taught in Christianity and Islam, then there is no doubt that they will attain a very good rebirth in the next life, whether they believe in that or not. And all the religions emphasize on the practice of the compassion and affection. And this is something that we can find in all the traditions. But when it comes to the presentation of the concept of liberation or the possibility to eliminate the afflicted emotions, so this is very unique to Lord Buddha's teaching. And even in the Buddhist philosophical schools, the very subtle form of the emptiness, which is the mere absence of all the conventionalities, is again coming from the Prasangika, Madhyamika Prasangika's schools. So other than that, even all the other schools' presentations are not ultimate. So these are not easy, but we need to contemplate further. And if we meditate in this way for a long time, whether we can say this is the view of the Madhyamika school or any other philosophical system. So we have to consider these as a key to unlock into the understanding the philosophical systems. So therefore, Shantideva speaks here about respectfully I prostrate myself to the Sugatas. And Sugata here, these two terms, the Su meaning the happiness, and Gata means to go away, to go into that kind of happiness. So practicing and with the understanding of such a kind of emptiness, we will be able to attain the supreme enlightened state aspect of Buddha, which is which is one of the 4 kayas, enlightened states of Buddha, that too is again categorized into the one state of Buddha which is just merely free from the adventitious, and another one which is the nature of emptiness. Then again, the way of emptiness is again need to be backed by skillful means such as bodhicitta and compassion, and also a wisdom realizing emptiness, which is again not supported by the compassion, and the bodhicitta will not be able to eliminate the ultimate obscurations to omniscient. And emptiness also need to be meditated with such a great motivation in order to benefit all the sentient beings. So with such a motivation that I need to attain the Dhammakaya, the truth body. And the reason why I need to attain the truth body is to understand, to attain the omniscient mind, and that too as a means of benefiting the sentient beings. So therefore, the other forms of the enlightened aspects, such as the Buddha of perfect resources, the Nirmankaya and the Sambhogakaya, are relevant here. And one of the 4 enlightened aspects is the wisdom body. So with the wisdom body and the Sambhogakaya and the other 2, so this completes the 4 kayas or the enlightened aspects of the Lord Buddha. So with for a broad understanding of the 4 enlightened aspects of the Buddha, then if you go for refuge, then it becomes a very heavy and a meaningful one. So for that, we need to first understand the jewel of the Buddha. For that, we need to understand the jewel of Dharma, which is here again the teaching in terms of the realization and cessation. And such a kind of the teaching, which is again comprised of the cessation and the path to enlightenment. And we need to rely on someone who has attained the path of seeing, and who has been elevated to another level, very far from the ordinary person. So therefore, the third one here, as well as to their noble sons. And the third and the fourth line, here I shall explain how to engage in the vows of Buddha's son, the meaning of which I have contained in accordance with the scriptures. So when Shantideva says in accordance with the scriptures, then he says that this is not his own creation, but he has sources for that. If that is the case, if the sutras have already presented that, then why you need to write it again? Why you need to present it again? So then here comes the next point that, for example, if you look at the fundamental of the middle way philosophy, you have all the presentations about the emptiness in a very short and a summarized way, which can be practiced very nicely. But if you look at its root sutras, so the presentation on the emptiness are very extensively presented that one becomes very difficult to recollect them together. So, for example, the great the volumes of the Prajnaparamita Sutras run into 12 volumes, 14 volumes, and so on. So therefore, Shantideva here says that this is not his own creation, and he also presents it in a very summarized way, a very condensed way. So therefore, there is no fallacy of fallacy of redundancy. That's something to present again, which has been presented before. And Shantideva is again someone who has the qualities of humility and so on. And from the terms of the content, so this is the second verse, there is nothing that has not been explained before. So this is speaking about the content. Then, even though the content may be the same, but if you present it in a very poetic way, then it's a different case. So Shantideva says that I also have no skill in the art of rhetoric. So third line speaks about the purpose behind the composition of the text, as we can find in the Dhammakrit's text, where he says that he did not find any benefits to write the Pramana text, because all the disciples seems to possess the afflicted emotions and they are biased and so on. And for example, this is pertaining to the faults of a disciple, that out of eagerness, a very haste eagerness, they try to study a text, or some people study the text out of finding the poetic way. So this is, of course, these are all faults pertaining to a disciple. So indirectly, so these lines present the faults of the students pertaining to a student, and indirectly it tells us about the qualities that is needed for a disciple to receive this teaching. So whatever the Shantideva is presented here in a condensed way, if someone practice it in a very wholeheartedly, and for example, if someone has to study and read the text, all the sutras daily, it will be very difficult. So, but Shantideva's text is a very short text, so it is something that we can one can practice. So, due to such purposes, one need to study the Shantideva's text. Then there is also, we have the four preference, that the consideration of the teacher and the teaching. So also the teaching has to be placed more important compared to the teacher. And also from the word, the literal words and the meaning. So the meaning has to be placed more important compared to the literal sentence. So many of us usually get attracted by the beautiful lines, the words. And recently we have this celebration of the Shakespeare's 400 years and so thing. And I think that this is merely attachment towards the beautiful lines, the words. So this perception, my own perception, compared to the four preference that do not prefer the person and so on. But other people may be really amazed at those writings. I have nothing to say against them. So if you are someone who really consider the meaning more important than the word, so then this Shantideva's text will be beneficial. And since this can be of some benefit, therefore there is a purpose behind the composition of this text. So I write this in order to acquaint it to my mind. So here I wanted to tell a story. It was many years before. I went to in Spiti and Kashar in northern India. There is a huge pass, the mountain pass, and after crossing the mountain, there are some villages which I know very well. I've been there a few times. There is one mountain called Bell Mountain. So some people say that the peak of that mountain is similar to a bell, so therefore it's called a Bell Mountain. Or due to one of the yogis, we shared a similar name. So we went there, a part of our vacation. But now I'm 81 years old, so I just can only assume mentally that, oh, this mountain, the Bell Mountain, is beautiful, but it's impossible for me to go up there. So since I know the villagers, and I'm very friendly with them, and they bring tea and bread, and we all sit together and eat, and to do some discussion. And I told them that you are all followers of Buddha, and you practice Buddha's teaching. Then I asked them, what is Buddhism? So they say, my homage to Buddha, my homage to Dharma, and my homage to Sangha, Buddham Sharanam Gacchami, and so on.
Continuously, I ask them, what is Buddha? What is Dharma? Then they say, we don't know. Then,
so then I asked them, what is the difference between Brahma, the Hindu god, and the Indra and Buddha? They say same. So here comes they shows their mistakes in understanding who is Buddha and who is Brahma. And this is a great mistake coming out of not understanding the teachings of the Buddha. And it was once I came to Lucknow. One of the Indian students, a few Indian students came to receive me, and I asked them. They used to recite Buddham Sharanam Gacchami, Dharmam Sharanam Gacchami, and so on. And I asked them, what is Buddha? And no one seems to know. So therefore, it is very important to study about Buddha and so on. So this is the third verse. For due to acquaintance with what is wholesome, the force of my faith may for a short while increase because of this. So this is very important to generate an acquaintance with the virtues may not arise very quickly. So this again has to depend on the three levels of the wisdom that we discussed this morning. The wisdom arising out of listening to a scripture, contemplation, and meditation, and so on. So the meditative mind is generally referred to a state of mind which arises out of listening to the scriptures and understanding of the meaning through the contemplation. So I've explained that very detailed this morning. So such a kind of the wisdom need to be preceded by another two wisdoms of the contemplation and the listening. And many of us have not heard about it. And even those who have heard these things many times, but they take it as a usual way without really contemplating or thinking much. And so in this way, even though you have faith, but you become someone that who can be lead to anything by someone else. And if in such a state, if someone tells that, oh, Buddhism is very good, then you may feel a reverence for that. But then at another time, someone criticizes the Buddha's teaching. And there is also some saying that, of course, the Buddha's teachings are wonderful, but when we go further and further, then there is nothing. They all speak about emptiness, empty, empty. So then they think that something that really comes of benefit in our daily life become more beneficial. So if we do not have such a kind of wisdom, then we are what we call foolish people who can lead any other people. That someone says this is good, then you just follow. And someone just criticizes something, then you just follow that. So if someone generates a genuine understanding based on the understanding and the wisdom, then no one can lead you to something. And here, when the Shantideva speaks about faith, it's not just a blind faith or faith towards a Buddha. And faith here is again the faith of a very clean, of a clear faith, that since that thing is very beautiful and attractive, for example, in terms of the three jewels, that is something that we all need to attain. Then one needs to have another faith, which is the faith willing to attain that similar state. And that second level of faith again will be followed by the third faith, which is more towards a belief or something that you generate understanding of that object based on the wisdom. So the third line says, if however these are seen by others equal to fortune to myself, it may be meaningful. So from the fourth sentence onwards, so I think I will say first the 9th chapter. So have you found the 9th chapter?
Okay. 9th chapter. 9th chapter. Okay.
The chapter on wisdom. So this is, as I have presented this morning, that all of these practices were taught by the Mighty One for the sake of wisdom. And in terms of all the previous chapters, from the chapter number 1 to 7, from the awakening mind to the concentration, so these were all being taught in order to generate the wisdom. So these are all ultimately have to go to the wisdom. Therefore, those who wish to pacify suffering should generate this wisdom. This is the third and the fourth line. And it is very evident that the origin, the root of all the suffering is the afflicted emotions. And within the different emotions, the ignorance is the root of all the afflicted emotions. And here the ignorance is again referred to the ignorant of the true grasping, the grasping of the true grasping of the true existence. So this is again presented in the Madhyamika text that by the cause and the effect, all the phenomena which arises from the cause and effect, so they do not arise, they do not exist inherently. So a mind which grasps all these phenomena as having its intrinsic nature, so from it arises the truth of the first interdependent link, which is the ignorance. Then the other interdependent links arise after that. So when here the category of the ignorant can be again referred to the grasping of the true existence pertaining to the person or the phenomena and so on. Therefore, those who wish to pacify suffering should generate this wisdom. So when we say that ignorance is the cause of the sufferings, so therefore the antidote for that kind of afflicted mind has to be a mind which understands the nature of phenomena. So therefore there is no way possibility that a compassion or the bodhicitta, which is a skillful mind, can be the direct antidote for the ignorance. And it is also presented by Dhammakriti that mental factors such as compassion and the love, since they are not directly contradict in terms of their the graspings to the ignorance, so therefore the bodhicitta and the other skillful means factor will not be totally eliminate the afflictions. So for example, the ignorant of not understanding the reading alphabet or something, so need to be eliminated by a wisdom later which understand that to read the alphabet. So other than that, just merely having a faith that may I be, or by prayer that may I be able to read, will not be able to eliminate that kind of the ignorance. Then what kind of wisdom is here? Then we have discussed this morning, and the emptiness here is again referring to the wisdom, understanding the emptiness. So next comes the presentation of the two truths. So the Buddha has presented the two truths. The one is the conventional truth and the ultimate truth. And also we can find the similar in the sutra and also in the Heart Sutra that the form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. And form is not different from emptiness and emptiness is not different from emptiness. So this also presents the two truths as essentially identical but conceptually distinct. So when it says the form is emptiness, there's also a few ways to interpret that line. I've found in one of the sutras of the 20,000 verses that the form itself is not being empty of the emptiness. Here the emptiness is not the agent because the form as the subject itself, an object itself, is the free of the absent of inherent existence. So the understanding here is that the form is not like a pot that is being kept on the table, and the emptiness as another object that is being derived, or the absence of that nature. So here the quality of the emptiness and the object, which is the pot or the form, are not too different. So the nature of the form itself is the emptiness here. So then the second one comes about the emptiness is the form. So this is very important, as Nagarjuna has presented in the fundamental of the wisdom that so whatever is the Tibetan origination, so this is emptiness. So what this kind of teaching is the ultimate teaching on middle way philosophy. So this verse is from Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom. And here, when it speaks about interdependent, it speaks about the absence of non-relying upon each other. So if one have a broad understanding or even a very gross understanding about the emptiness, then one will automatically get to an understanding that it depends on it depends on something else to prove its own existence. And when we speak about the relationship between the cause and effect in terms of the Tibetan origination, of course the cause happens first, then the result comes later. So therefore the result depends on the cause to happen itself. But this is not the ultimate explanation about the interdependent relations coming from the highest Madhyamika school. So the highest Madhyamika school speaks that the cause itself, merely the title of the cause itself depends on the nature of the result. By the help of the result, something can be designated as a cause. So therefore, the designation of the cause and the result are interdependent and are correlated. So based on this, we have to establish the concept of the agent and the object and its action. So therefore, the second line in the Heart Sutra says, the emptiness is form. So first, when it says the form is emptiness, it speaks about through the Tibetan origination, we gain an understanding of the emptiness. Then secondly, when it says the emptiness is form, by the understanding of emptiness, one gets to generate or develop the understanding of interdependent relation. Then the third one, the form is not different from emptiness, and emptiness is not different from form. It presents the two truths as being same entity, even though it may be due to a different aspect. So they were given the different titles or the name of conventional and ultimate, but essentially they are identical. So if that is the case, then what is the ultimate truth? So here's the second line. So ultimate truths are not objects of experience by the mind. So here the mind or the intellect. So in Tibetan we have the term lo lo same, But in Sanskrit, it seems to be different.
거리는
There another line.
부지사시다.
The yogis, by the practice of their mind, cultivating of their mind, so they will be elevated to another level. So here, the other verse of the mind, the term mind, and here, that ultimate is not object of the intellect. So here, this true intellect in Tibetan, even though it's the same term law, but in Sanskrit it seems to be different. So ultimately here the intellect refers to any kind of mind which has an appearance of conventional appearances. So the ultimate truth is not something that can be perceived directly by a mind which conventional mind. So after thorough investigations and by contemplations over the time, there is also a text coming from Lobin Sangye Ishe. So whatever appearance, the appearances are in the form of the emptiness, and within that emptiness we are able to see the truth. Then also the seventh Dalai Lama says that in the autumn when the clouds form in the sky, so merely with that as a metaphor, so if we able to find the ultimate, the truth, so then so that conventional phenomena will dissolve into the ultimate reality. So ultimately, you only get the absence of the object of negation. So merely the absence of the object of negation is what you get after eliminating all the conventional elaborations. So therefore, the ultimate truth is not an object, or the ultimate truth cannot be perceived by any other mind that perceives conventional reality. It can be conceived only by a mind which understands the wisdom. So the nature of all the phenomena are to be accepted or established by merely as it is known in the world. So these two lines of the second verse, it's the third verse coming from the 9th chapter, is very relevant. The two types of person are seen to experience these two truths: yogis endowed with the concentration of superior insight and calm abiding. And here the yogi is again referring to not just by the appearance of the objects, a person. So when we normally explain the term yogic, is a person who analyzes the nature of the phenomena not merely by its appearances. And the Tibetan term ninjor, so the second part of the term jor has a connotation that one is able to conclude and reach a point where they are able to meet together. So, and when it is personalized with ninjor pa, so this is the agent or the person who follows such kind of practice and understands the emptiness. And it is a person who understand the ultimate truth based on logic reasonings by contemplation and being investigated, so they are called Nenjorpa or yogic. So here we have the two yogis endowed with the concentration of superior insight and calm abiding and the common people. So here the term yogis and the common people. So the difference between these two. And all the afflicted emotions actually arise through conceptual elaborations pertaining to the desirable object and not. So whether it's one's own understanding, inner experiences, or the external phenomena that appear to us. So when they appear, when external things appear to us, they appear as having their own inherent existence. So such a kind of a person who do not analyze further rather than the appearances of the object are referred to here as the common people. So such a kind of mental state that only merely accept the conventional realities will be negated or refuted by the meditative state of mind that analyzes further the nature of the reality. So the fourth verse, furthermore among the yogis, reads that as the scientists investigate and state that, so they also belong to the first level of the yogis who merely do not accept the things as they exist. And even in humans, we have a certain person who do not have any kind of education and who are just similar to animals, merely depending upon the physical senses. Here can be referred to as the common people. But then there is another one who are educated. So even though they may have some immediate problems and the hurdles, but for the long-term goal, so they take the challenge to walk further for the future and the long-term goal. So this can be here referred to the uncommon or the yogis. So, merely depending upon the five senses as the main object of one's understanding, so such kind of understanding will be negated by the yogic mind, which understand the nature. And in India, I think a few years back in Amritsar, we have a convention with a few different faiths in India, and also there were some professors attending the conference. I think it was Sufi, one of the Sufi professor, and he told during the conference that we have the three questions. The first question is that what is the nature of self? Then the second question is whether there is a beginning to the self or not, so which is the second. And the third is whether there will be an end to the self or not. So these are the three main questions pertaining to all the religious faiths in the world. I find that very relevant. And all the religious faiths, whether Buddhist or non-Buddhist, so we all consider the self as the one who experiences the happiness and undergoes sufferings. So in India's case, for example, for the last 3,000 years, they have paid a special interest to identify the nature of that self. So apart from Buddhists, all the major other religions speaks about the nature of the self as very intrinsic, or the self as something different from the aggregates. So the physical body or the aggregates, so when someone passes away and when it is cremated, so the physical ceases to continue. But there is a soul or the self which is eternal, similar to an eternal, which pass from one body to another and go to heaven and hell and so on. And even the non-Buddhist ancient Indian school say that there need to be a self which comes from the previous life and which goes to the next life. So there need to be a general self which can be spread to all the three lives.
류디 가사르지 저분연의 내국이 류디 메라샤사르지
So, from that perspective, the physical body is also different. At the time of the sowing, the karma or the cause, and the physical body which experience that fruits are different. For example, someone at 40 years old and when it is 80 years old, so those two physical body are different. So even though in this one life, even though it may be different, but the continuity is different. So therefore, the causes that particular self planted will be, there is a possibility that can be experienced in this life. So therefore, the self cannot go to next life or cannot come from the previous life. So therefore, the self is eternal. And since it's also unitary, it is a unitary in the form of not being partless. And it is, since it do not depend on the cause, then it is also independent. So therefore, the self being assembly of the three qualities of being eternal and unitary and independent. But then Lord Buddha speaks about anatma, which is the absence of the soul or the self. So then what is the nature of this self? So this is as coming from the sutra, that as chariot is being designated based on the formation or the assembly of its part. Similarly, due to the assembly of the physical aggregates, the self is merely designated or being pointed to that assembly of the aggregates. So apart from the Buddha's teachings, all the other religious faiths seems to be accepting a self which is different from the aggregate. And here again, when we speak about the absence of the self, we are saying that there is not an independent self which is in the control of the one's aggregate. So this is what is meant by the selflessness. So many people face there is no self in Buddhism because they speak about selflessness. So conventionally, a self exists, but an independent or eternal self, which is the agent and to control or one's physical aggregates, doesn't exist. So this is the meaning of selflessness. So this is pertaining to the first question. And whether the self has a beginning or not, for the second question, whether it's the Christian or Muslim or so on. So they all believe that since the first day of our coming into this world is the origin of ourself as being created by the God. But in Buddhism, the self is merely designated on the continuity of the mind and also the formation of the aggregates. So since the consciousness, which is the object of designation for the self, the consciousness, since it doesn't have a beginning, so therefore the self cannot have a beginning. But then there is another section of non-Buddhists who says that the self, for certain lifetimes, it do not have a beginning, but ultimately it is being designed by Brahma. So after all, they also believe in the self as having a beginning. I'm not so sure about the presentation of the self coming from the Jainism. And I think that they are also similar to Buddhists, that self do not have a beginning. So then what about the third questions, whether they have an end or not? So in terms of the Samkhya traditions, the self is the alone one that remains when all the other conventional elaborations dissolve into the self, which is the state of liberations. So in terms coming from the Samkhya traditions. And even in Buddhist school, there is one section of Vaibhashika school which state that when we attain the nirvana without remainder, so they say that all the self and the mental continuum comes to a cease. So according to that subclass of the Vaibhashika school, the school of great exposition, so it seems that the self seems to have an end. So other than that, all the other schools do not accept the self as having an end. So therefore the self will continues to exist even though we may change our physical body, so it will go until when we attain enlightenment. So therefore the Buddhist teaching says that the self do not have a beginning and nor does it has an end. So this is about the introduction of the Buddhist teaching, and also especially introduction of the Nalanda Sanskrit traditions, speaking about the two truths as being essentially identical and conceptually distinct, and that all the beneficial and the positive things arises from understanding the emptiness, the nature of the things. And when one ceases to understand the nature of the things, and all the sufferings and other negativities arise from the absence of the understanding of the nature of things. So till here is a brief explanation about Buddha's teaching. So back to the first chapter. From the fourth line onwards, about the leisure and endowments. So to be taught from here about the awakening mind, so they're all the qualities of a mind. So such a kind of the spiritual qualities such as bodhicitta and compassion can be attained only as a human. So because as a human being, we have this intelligence power. So animals do not have this capacity. When I was under medical care in America, so there are some deers. I've seen that in the morning, so they move to other places where there are better grass or sun, and they move back in the evening. So then I thought that we are the same. So they have a sense of happiness, a wish to happiness and not undergo suffering, and also the self-grasping. So we are same in this respect. But since they lack the wisdom, the intelligence capacity, so they cannot do anything beyond that. So apart from feeling sorry and doing some prayer for them, there is nothing that we can do. And in Lamrim tradition, we speaks about by such a kind of path that we will be able to eliminate the samsara, the cyclic existence, and so on. So therefore, if we do not have the intelligence capacity, there is nothing that we can do. So the fourth line reads that this human rebirth, which is endowed with leisures and all other qualities, is the supreme rebirth for such a practice. And if someone do not have the leisure in terms of being under the influence or being born in a remote village and so on, they do not have the capacity to practice. So we are born in a central place, and also we have the intelligence capacity, and also apart from many great religions in the world today, we have to feel fortunate that we met with the teachings of the Buddha. So leisure and endowment are very hard to find, and since they accomplish what is meaningful for men, so this is the fourth verse. So this speaks about the physical, physical physical body or the rebirth to which such a kind of awakening mind, the bodhicitta and compassion can be developed. So next about what are the mind is causes mind. So even we may have such a physical facilities and so on, but if we lack the mental state to contemplate further, then we may not be able to do much. So the fifth line actually speaks about its causes of the mental causes. Just as a flash of lightning on a dark cloudy night, for an instant brightly illuminates all, likewise in this world. So therefore the compassion need to be generated in advance before the bodhicitta comes into being. So therefore we need to work hard to first cultivate the great compassion. And the compassion again, as the prayer by Shantideva coming, that as long as the space remains and the sentient being remains, may I too remain to dispel the sufferings of the world. And also by Nagarjuna's prayer, that as long as there are even a single sentient beings, that I will remain forever to benefit them. So here it speaks about the bodhicitta, which is of two intentions. So from the 6th verse onwards, it presents the benefits of the awakening mind. So I won't read each verses to summarize. So we will read at the end of the chapter. So all the happiness in the world actually arises from a mind concerned for other, and all the suffering in the world actually arises from the self-centered feeling. So this is very true. We can see in this world how does an individual can create such a big problems in this world. We can think about the 20th century. About 20 million people were killed in different wars. And even in 21st century, we are at the starting of the 21st century. Still, we have that very strong imprints of our previous century. So whenever we feel some insecure or dissatisfactions, we tend to use the violence as means to accomplish our mission. So though all over the part of the world we speak about the peace and so on, but to certain part of the world still we can see a loss of lives every day due to war and different terrorist activities. And again, all these things has to come back to the attachment and the anger, and that you have to be victorious and the other has to be at the losing end. Even in the terms of the dog, if a certain dog is very furious and always raw to bark towards the other, so then he seems to be without any friends. So even the dog, certain dog may be very huge in terms of his physical body. So, but if it is more calm, then he or she seems to have more friends. Similarly, for human also, that the more we have the sense-centered feeling, and the more we neglect other people's concern, we tend to suffer more. And the more we wish to have happiness for other, that we are same. Similarly, as I consider my own life very precious, so therefore the other people's life are precious in this same relation. So therefore, if you have such a kind of consideration, then the war will never happen. So all this war actually happens with the very immediate and the temporary mental states, mental states of wishing to mental states of wishing to gain profit for oneself. Even if we take the small examples within a small fight in a family or two different friends, so all these small fights also arises from the self-centered feeling. So therefore, Shantideva says that all the happiness in the world arises from the self-centered feeling. All the happiness in the world arises from the concern, having a concern for other. And similarly, it is for the happiness. So if one has such a kind of consideration, of course, one will be more happy in the immediate period and also for the long term. And for the humans also, if we have more respect towards each other, and if everyone works towards and stay in a unity, then the world will be a very peaceful, and the world will live in a very harmony. And I used to say that the 20th century was a very violent era, violent century. But in 21st century is a century of dialogue, where we have to find solution to all the conflicts by dialogue. So until the afflicted emotions of the three poisons exist in this world, it is impossible to have a world free of any conflicts. There will be conflicts, but as long as we have conflicts, but we have to solve the conflict and the problem through negotiations and through dialogues. So of course this cannot be done by the animals, but as human beings we have this special brain and the mind which can investigate and which is by nature very intelligent. So in this way, through our mutual discussions and negotiations, we can solve all the problems in this world. Nowadays we speak about the human rights, we speak about democracy, and so on. All these are actually related to the concern for other. And after that, the verse states that if we do not exchange our own happiness with the suffering of other, then there will not be let go of the enlightenment state. But even in this life, there will not be any happiness. So the summary of this verse is that if we help other and if we have any service to the other people, so for the immediate period, we will have more friends, we will have more people who know. And even if you smile at someone out of great compassion, in a very nice way, then people will also respond in the same way. If you have a very fierce face, of course, then no one will respond to you in a very peaceful way. So whether one believes in any religion or not. So in order to have a peaceful world and a peaceful and a calm family, even for family, so the self-centered, we need to decrease the level of our self-centered feeling and have to cultivate more concern for other. So we have been used to the self-centered feeling for a very long time. So we have been having that kind of sense since beginningless time. But then through our own intelligence mind, we need to see the disadvantages of being under the influence of the self-centered feeling and the advantages of being let go of it. So in this way, we can be more beneficial. So Shantideva also states, in the later part that who do not wish to attain bodhicitta, which is the capacity to eliminate all the problems and the sufferings, and which will lead you from happiness to happiness. And if you consider your own problems and your own happiness as not much important, then even though you may encounter into a lot of problems, but that will not bring you a lot of suffering. So from the opposite side, if you think of your own only for yourself, so until you have abolished this physical body, there will be always problems and there will be always suffering. And you have to always veil for such a kind of suffering. So if you start developing even a small level of the concern for other, so that from that time onwards, one will start having the concern for others. A happier life will start from that moment. And if we practice in this way, then it will be in accordance with the prayers by Lord Maitreya that may all the lower rebirths and animal rebirths will come to cease, and may all have the bodhicitta mind. And my prostration to bodhicitta, so this is line by Maitreya. So if one able to develop the bodhicitta, so this has the potential to purify all our negativities and gain all the merits and accumulations and so on. So even you recite a lot of many mantras and so on may not be very effective. So it is very clear that most of the negativities that we have accumulated actually arises due to our own self-centered feelings. So therefore, if you practice the awakening mind, then all of those negativities will be eliminated. And also in terms of the accumulations, there won't be any great accumulations apart from the awakening mind. And may all sentient beings have happiness, and may I lead all the sentient beings to the state of enlightenment. So if you contemplate and in practice in that way, so that will be the greatest sources of gaining accumulations and clearing one's negativities. And so today all the objects of refuge who are the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, so they all become the savior or the jewels due to the practice of the bodhicitta and the great compassion. And also while they are in the cyclic existence in the samsaric world, they have practiced a lot of the concern for other, the awakening mind. Even during the accumulation period, the reason why they accumulated such great realization is due to the cultivation of bodhicitta mind. And also at the ultimate level of enlightenment, the main realization all arises through the awakening mind. So let's move to the 12 verses. All other virtues are like the plantain tree, for after bearing fruit, they simply perish. So the 12th verse is very wonderful. All other virtues are like the plantain tree, for after bearing fruit, they simply perish. But the perennial tree of the awakening mind unceasingly bears fruits and thereby flourishes without end. So any kind of the positive accumulations which is not being conjoined with the awakening mind will not be so effective. For example, the accumulations such as the accumulations of the first path, or the accumulations such as being praying, having an aspiration for the next rebirth and so on. So if you just aspire to have a better rebirth in the future, so when you get that rebirth, so all that accumulations and the positive imprints will cease the moment you gain that rebirth. And also the accumulations pertaining to liberation is also will also remain until you attain to liberations. So as soon as you attain the moksha or liberation, so that merits will cease to exist after that. The third line says that any kind of merits, which is combined with the awakening mind, will bear fruits until you attain enlightenment. Because when you aspire, you have aspired in such a way that I will work hard for the sentient beings until all the sentient beings attain enlightenment. So therefore, until then, the merits will remain. So next is the 13th verse. Like entrusting myself to a brave man when greatly afraid, by entrusting myself to this, I shall be swiftly liberated. So all these verses present the benefits of awakening mind. I used to say that, and I also have a feeling. So when we think about oneself gaining some permanent and ultimate liberation and so on, of course there is a sense of self-center, there is a sense of self-concern. And also the reason behind why we need to eliminate the self-center is also for the purpose of self. So therefore, what I summarize is that we should not indulge in the very foolish nature of the self-concern. For example, in order to gain some immediate gains, then indulging in murder and stealing and so on. So these are all very foolish ways of being self-concerned. So we need to be very intelligent, self-concern, which is actually backed by intelligence. Some people also have a wrong connotation that when we speak about working for others' concern, then they thought that they themselves have to be forgotten. So this is not the truth. We can find similar lines in the prayers of the Bodhisattva, but it is actually from aspirational prayers, may not be in reality. So therefore, the awakening mind doesn't mean that you are neglected. So the awakening mind is something that is beneficial both for the self and for the other. So next is the 15th verse.
Sentence 15th. 전에 어떤 되게 아니 네 당화 들으면 자주 섬시다디 아니 그래서 그랬을나
So we have discussed about this awakening mind. So then what is the nature of this awakening mind? As we have did the citation from the Abhisamaya Alamkara this morning, that the awakening mind is generally described as being of two intentions. And also the developing of the awakening mind is by nature two intention, and here the two intention actually refers to the intention of the cause, which is the great compassion, and then the resultant intention, which is the bodhicitta. So such a kind of mind, which is for the sake of other sentient beings, you yourself want to attain enlightenment. So in this one awakening mind, the two qualities of two intentions are being assembled. So if that is the case, then what are the categories, different classifications, and the categories of this awakening mind? Of course, we discussed this morning about the generation of this mind, about the 7-point cause and effect, and the exchange of self and other. Consideration of the all sentient beings as one's mother, then remembering their kindness, and so on. And from the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way, it also speak apart from the 7-point cause and effect. It also speak about the exchange, equalizing, and the exchange of self and other, and also thinking about the faulty nature of the self-concern and so on. Now back to the classification of the bodhicitta. In brief, the awakening mind should be understood to be of two types: the mind that aspires to awaken and the mind that ventures to do so. So for these two classifications of the bodhicitta, there's also different assertions that we can find in the Indian scholars. Again, it depends on whether it's an aspirational bodhicitta or whether it's an aspirational awakening mind or the engaging awakening mind. It depends on whether that kind of mind has been directly conjoined by the 6 perfections, the practice of the 6 perfections. So merely by generating an aspirational mind is of great meritorious. And at the aspirational level, you take the vow for yourself that you will work for the benefit of all the sentient beings and that you won't revert from it. And as it is stated in the Shantideva that after taking the vow to benefit all the sentient beings and taking the aspirational mind, from that time onwards, whether you sleep, whether you are awake, but the continuity of your merits will flow. And those merits will never cease. So till here is the benefits of the bodhicitta, the awakening mind. So in any kind of work in this world, first we see what is the advantages if you do that kind of activities. Then if you see some benefit and advantages, then you tend to engage into that activities and develop your own encouragement towards that. For example, any kind of our studies, in terms of the doctorate, doing a PhD for any kind of studies. So you always think about the benefits if you complete that degree and so on. So if you see the degree purpose and the benefits after that, then even though during the course of your studies, even though you may have to undergo a lot of hardships, but you will willingly take it. So they have similar. It's similar here. So till here we complete the first chapter. So next is the disclosure of evil. And while taking the bodhicitta mind, the awakening mind, sometimes we speak about taking both the aspirational and engaging mind together, which is coming from Shantideva's text. But in the Asanga's Bodhisattva ground, there is also a section for taking the aspirational mind and the engaging mind alternately. And also they have different verses for taking the both awakening mind. And also when we speak about simultaneously taking these two mind, I do not think that both the aspirational and engaging minds are being taken at the same time. What I meant is that the verses for taking the vows is only there's only one verse for taking the vows, so therefore it is called simultaneous taking the mind. And in order to take the bodhicitta mind, first we have to do the it has to be preceded by the seven limb prayer. And the seven limb here refers to the limbs, the limb of offering and the limb of confession and so on. So in order to seize that precious mind, I offer now to the Tathagatas, to the sacred Dharma, the stainless jewel, and to the sons of Buddha, the oceans of excellence. And the purification limb, it is presented here in the verse number 26 of the second chapter.
26 sentences.
26th verse of the second chapter. So for the preliminary for the purification, we need to have first go for refuge to the three jewels. And we also speak about the four antidotal powers, the powers of the base, which is going for refuge to the three jewels. Then also the antidotal powers of taking into the remedy and so on. So this 26th verse reads in this way: I seek refuge in all Buddhas until I possess the essence of awakening. Likewise, I seek refuge in Dharma and in the assembly of Buddhas. And from 27th verse, with folded hands I beseech the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who possess the great compassion and reside in all directions. And the 28th verse, where it speaks about the beginningless of cyclic existence. So therefore, here the beginningless actually speaks about the constant continuity of the consciousness mind. And here the consciousness or the mind can be generally categorized into the sensory mind. And also the origin of the sensory mind can be further explained through first developing the organs, the physical organs, then the mental, those sense consciousness arise after that. Then after coming into contact with the other objects, we tend to develop the desires and so on. And also when we speak about the conditions for a generation of the sensory minds, merely coming into contact with the external object doesn't necessarily bring the consciousness, the eye consciousness and so on. Therefore, there needs to be another condition called the immediate preceding condition. And also for any kind of the objects and the phenomena, when we speak about the cause and conditions, we always speak about the primary cause and the secondary cause. For example, for a clay pot, so the dough or the clay is the primary substance and the primary cause which comes into the form of the pot. But the secondary causes such as the heat and the potter's hand and the skill also play a part in the formation of the pot. And also, even though all the conditions are met, but if there is no continuity from the previous mind, then the mental factor cannot arise. So therefore, it says very clearly that merely by secondary causes were assembled, it does not bring up phenomena. So therefore, the primary causes also need to be assembled. So till now, the scientist doesn't speak about the existence of a mind which is other than the brain. And at the dawn of the 20th century and at the starting of 21st century, especially the brain scientists and the neurologists, in a unbiased experiment. So they feel that there is another factor which makes some changes happening within the brain. So at this time, they do not designate that particular factor as mind or consciousness. They say that, but there is one potential or factor. I think it was a few years ago, I have a discussion with some scientists that when someone is conceived, the mother's blood and the father's sperm, even though they may be completely without any defect. So when they meet, so merely by meeting the father and the mother's substances together in a very good manner doesn't necessarily makes a woman conceive. So it shows that there is a third factor, and the third factor here seems to be a traveling or the intermediate state of the consciousness. And also when we speak about the Big Bang theory, a very compressed energy, a very strong energy which is compressed happened to the bursting of all the energies together, which results in the Big Bang. And also why all these energies were stored in one place at the first hand also need to have another causes. So therefore, if there is only one Big Bang, then it will be very difficult to explain through the cause and effect. So we may have to say that the Big Bang at before its bursting state needs to be without any cause and conditions. So therefore, the third party here is speaking about the connection of the karma comes into being. So any kind of physical phenomena, be it the Big Bang or so on, so all these substances have their own the preceding primary cause. So they won't arise from without cause or eternal cause. So even if you think from the very subtle matter, so they all need to have a preceding primary cause. So therefore, in the 400 verses, Aryadeva states that for all the matters, even for the atoms, there is no beginning for these atoms. So even similarly as there is no beginning for even the physical substances like atoms, similarly for the mind there is no beginning to a state where we can pinpoint it as the beginning of that consciousness. If there is a beginning to the mind or consciousness, so the first moment of the mind has to be either happened by without cause, or we may have to say that it happened by a cause which is not corresponding to the result, and so on. Or we may have to say that it arises from a cause which do not have the capacity to bring the result. So therefore, if we think about the continuity or the substance continuity, we cannot say that it has a beginning. So that's the reason why there are some scientists which says that it is not just one Big Bang, but many Big Bangs happened. And I also have a discussion with some scientists a few years back that even by our own experience, sometimes when we develop some attachment and other afflicted emotions and so on, we tend to have some physical expression out of it. But then there is another state due to physical being unwell, the mind is also disturbed. So which shows that sometimes the mind plays an important role in shaping the physical expression, and the physical illness and the well-being making a difference to the state of the mental mind. Or sometimes neither, being that generally just by developing a conceptual elaboration or conceptual thought, it may result in the moving of one's heart. So I discussed this with a scientist, and he said that yes, definitely there is this possibility. He agrees with me that there is a possibility, but it cannot be happened. So I think this is a very strange standpoint from the science, that there is a possibility of that happening, but we cannot accept that. And nowadays, the neurosurgeons speak about the brain plasticity, that by training, that they can bring changes to the brains of the humans, and the brains of the humans, and especially to the patients. So therefore, ultimately, many of the scientists come to a conclusion that there is something separate from the brain, something consciousness of the mind. And if it is a consciousness of the mind, then there needs to be a continuity. As it is stated by Dhammakriti that there cannot be another cause for consciousness other than the consciousness itself. So the verse number 28 reads that throughout beginningless cyclic existence in this life and in others. So for all this life, due to the anger and the hatred, and under the influence of that, we tend to bring harm to the other people. So I'm here feeling repentant that all these afflicted emotions and my actions arises through the ignorance. And from my heart, I declare them to the Buddha. So this is about the confession or the purification verses. This verse number 29. And it's about the confession based on feeling remorse to one's own action. So from the verse number 30 onwards, so 32 verse, but I may well perish before all my evils have been purified. So please protect me in such a way as will swiftly and surely free me from them. So it is certain that after we are born, so we have to die. So the causes for one's death may be different. There are many external factors. There will be a lot of inner causes for that due to our unsettled mind, disturbed mind, from the averse point of view resulting to suicide, and also going under the addiction of the drug and drinking and so on. So due to these physical practices, one tends to destroy one's own physical well-being. And generally, there is also the cases where the elements are not in order, so which also result in the illness and the death of many people in the world. And nowadays in this world, we seems to experience more imbalance in the elements. Especially, there seems to be more earthquakes happening everywhere. And sometimes we tend to eat a lot of foods that we have not eaten before, the sweet, the sour, and the different tastes, which also result in our untimely death. The untrustworthy lot of death waits not for things to be done or undone. Whether I'm sick or healthy, this fleeting lifespan is unstable. So the summary of the verse number 33 is that it is certain that we will die, and but the time of the death is is uncertain. So at the time of the death, except from the teachings, except from one's accumulations, nothing will be helpful. And the gross level of the mind, which is the gross level of the mind, which commit some kind of actions, and by it the karmic imprints were being laid. So sometimes, for example, if we have to wake up if we have make a decision that I have to wake up at this time tomorrow, then I have to rise up early the next morning. So the imprints of that very thought acts as an causes for you to get up early in the morning. So during the time of sleep, of course, that mind that you thought before does not exist. But the imprint is still there. And also when you think about the recollection, it is very complicated. So merely from the functions of the brain, it is very difficult to explain the process of recollection. That how can we remember things that is over many years old? I have also some friends who are great meditators who can also stop the existence of the gross level of the mind and let the very subtle form of the mind arise within themselves. So the real mind that actually creates the connection between this and the next life is actually the very subtle mind, not the gross level of mind. So any kind of mental imprints that we left on that subtle of the mind pass into the next life and so on, and which again brings you to the recollection of the past. And this can be also result in sometimes even forecasting what may happen in future. So therefore, if you think of all these logical reasonings, that there is only brain and not consciousness, and there is also a mind or consciousness, we can see that there is more proof and reason towards the existence of the mind other than brain. So if you tend to accept that there is no consciousness, then it will be merely limited to your own perception that you cannot perceive it, And any kind of consciousness that will make a difference for the next life is also the subtle form of the mind, not the gross level of the mind. So at the time of death, it is only the subtle, any kind of the mental imprints, any positive imprints that we may have kept on the subtle level of the mind, subtle mind, will make a difference. So at this moment, all the afflicted emotions which are related to the gross levels of our senses, at this moment will bring many more damage to one's own self. So we are in the verse number 39. Remaining neither day nor night, life is always slipping by and never getting any longer. So the summary of these lines is that at the time of death, it's only the positive imprints that will make a difference. So this is about the confession limb or the purification limb from the seventh limb of practice. And next is the rejoice, the limb of rejoicing, and the dedication. So no need to elaborate on these two limbs.
쇼로가 죽지번에 막 삼다바이나 류더 디시 롱주도 주순 개와 탐제자 심지 끄기 들으지 방법을 나와자 생들을 맞체 다 류동
And next is about giving away one's physical body and also giving of one's the accumulations, the positive accumulations for the sake of others' benefit and so on. So all these verses, the 18 verses in this limb, so the 21 verse, which is again a very strong dedication, as this earth and the whole world is the common for all the sentient beings. May I be a cause to eliminate all the sufferings. And it's also not about just a month or the week, but that such a kind of strong dedication is for until the samsara comes to end. So may I be the causes for elimination of the suffering on all sentient beings till the samsara comes to end. So even when you encounter such temporary problems, so such a kind of strong mind, if you have some acquaintance, so that will really help you to calm your own problem. And also, so if you are able to benefit even small way to someone which can be benefited, so this is also a part of your practice. So on the final day, we will do Bodhisattva's vow and also the Manjushri's blessing on the final day.
So, 3 chapters completed.
So till here, we have completed 3 chapters. And today here, it is not about a kind of a blessing that I give you and you receive it, but this is more of a class. So it's more of the class. So if you are in a hurry, of course you can return, but if you have come from far away place and if you have time, so as I go back to my hotel after this session, so we will have another Q&A session. Yangde Rinpoche is a great scholar. And we have the translators and the Yangde Rinpoche, and so you can have a discussion and in the Q&A sessions. So if you have any kind of doubts or something, then you can ask any kind of questions. So in these 8 sessions that we will have in the 4 days, so if you really gain some understanding, then it will benefit for your whole day. And it will also bring you closer to the state of enlightenment. That's all. Thank you.
뭐야? 파면 섬자한테 대도 내주지. 얘들한테 따도 동. 정수 선보 가나 수수고.
대다 군제 면람 조주로 지
So